For everything I did for you, is this how you repay me? Yeah.
Spare me that crab. I can't be with you for pity's sake.
Move on. It's all in the past now.
The year Elijah Carter learned how expensive love could become. He was standing under a weak kitchen light in a one-bedroom apartment, staring at a letter that looked too thin to carry so much power. It was only a few sheets of paper, a school crest at the top, a few official lines, a signature at the bottom. But in his hands, it felt like a doorway, a future, a test. And maybe, though he did not know it yet, the beginning of the deepest wound of his life. Simone Brooks had been crying for almost 10 minutes when he reached the third paragraph. Not loud crying, not dramatic crying, the kind that rises from the chest when a person has spent too many years hoping for one thing and suddenly has to face the fact that it has finally arrived. She stood across from him in that cramped little kitchen with both hands over her mouth, her eyes wet, and her shoulders trembling, waiting for him to say it again. So he read the line a second time, then a third. Then he looked up at her, smiled the kind of smile that comes from somewhere pure, and said the words she had prayed over for years. "You got in." He laughed softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "Baby, you got in." That was all it took. Simone let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh and flew into his arms so hard the letter crumpled slightly between them. He did not care. He wrapped her up and held her tight. She buried her face in his neck and kept repeating the same thing over and over. "I got in. Oh my God, Elijah, I got in. I got in." The acceptance was for one of the nursing programs she had dreamed about for years. Not just any program, a respected one, a serious one. A program in Canada that came with prestige, opportunity, and the kind of career pathway people in their neighborhood talked about in lowered voices, as if success on that level belonged to another species of human being. Simone had worked for it. Late nights, extra classes, exam prep, volunteer hours, scholarship applications, personal statements written and rewritten until her laptop keys had gone warm under her fingers. Elijah had watched every step. He had watched her study with her hair tied back and dark circles under her eyes. He had watched her fall asleep over anatomy notes and wake up apologizing for being tired. He had watched her carry a dream so heavy that sometimes it made her sharp, quiet, and unreachable. And still, he believed in it almost as fiercely as she did. He kissed the side of her head and looked at the letter again. The joy lasted exactly 43 seconds before reality entered the room. Tuition, housing, travel, books, visa costs, health insurance, winter clothes, emergency funds. The list sat there, invisible but immediate. Simone drew back first. The joy in her face dimmed just enough for worry to step in. It was a look Elijah knew well by then. Hope interrupted by math. "They gave me partial aid," she said quickly, reaching for the second page. Her voice had changed from celebration to calculation. "It helps, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough." Elijah read the numbers, then read them again, then felt the kitchen get smaller. Outside, somebody's car alarm chirped in the distance. A neighbor's television thumped through the wall, and the refrigerator hummed with annoying consistency. Life went on like nothing sacred had just been placed under pressure. Simone stepped back and sat slowly at the tiny table near the window. The apartment was clean, but there was no hiding what it was. Secondhand chairs, cheap blinds, a scratch across the table from when they moved it in too fast, a stove that heated unevenly, a water stain in one corner of the ceiling they kept reporting to the landlord. They had learned to make it feel like home anyway. That had been one of Elijah's quiet talents. He could make lack feel less humiliating. He could put softness inside struggle, but even he knew there were limits. Simone stared at the figures and whispered, "I can't lose this." He looked at her. Not just looked, really looked. Or at the woman who had built her entire 20s around not becoming trapped. At the woman who had seen too many gifted people spend their lives one emergency away from collapse. At the woman who wanted more than just survival. Simone did not dream small. That was part of what he loved about her. She was not content to stay close to what was familiar just because it was less frightening. She wanted a different life, a bigger one with options, one with dignity, one where she could take care of people and never again have to choose between groceries and gas money. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. "We're not losing it," he said. She looked up at him with watery eyes. Her laugh this time was humorless. "We?" She shook her head. "Elijah, this kind of we costs money. We'll figure it out." She stared at him for a long moment. "Do not say that unless you mean it." "I mean it. You haven't even seen the full cost breakdown. Then show me." She pushed the papers toward him. He studied every line. The total amount hit like cold water. His chest tightened. Not because he lacked faith in her, because he knew exactly how little room their lives had for numbers this large. He worked maintenance at a commercial property company during the day. He picked up side appliance repair work on evenings and weekends. Sometimes he drove deliveries when the month got tight. He was disciplined with money, but discipline could only stretch reality so far. There was no hidden account, no rich relative, no family property to borrow against. Where his mother was retired and already rationing medication with quiet stubbornness. Simone's family loved her deeply, but they were surviving too. Everyone in their orbit had enough problems to fill a room. Still, he reached for her hand. "You got this opportunity for a reason," he said. "I'm not letting money be the thing that takes it from you." She held his gaze, searching it as if trying to figure out whether he was speaking from courage or foolishness. Maybe he was speaking from both. Love often does. That night, they built a budget that insulted them. They cut everything that could be cut. Streaming subscriptions, eating out, new clothes, weekend outings, small comforts, possible comforts, imagined comforts. By the time they were done, when the paper looked less like a plan and more like a confession of how little margin existed in their lives. Simone rested her elbows on the table and pressed her fingers against her temples. "What if this is too much?" she whispered. Elijah leaned back and studied her. A lot of people misunderstood Simone because she carried herself like a woman who would not crumble publicly. Her speech was polished. Her posture was sharp. Her standards were high. People called her intimidating when what they really meant was that she refused to shrink to make others feel larger. But Elijah knew the private version, the one who worried at 3 in the morning, the one who hated needing help, the one who carried embarrassment about poverty like it was a stain no amount of education could scrub out. The one who could sound hard when she was actually terrified. He reached across the table and gently lowered her hands from her face. "Listen to me," he said. "I would rather fight with you for this than watch you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd gone." Her eyes filled again. "That's easy to say now." "No, it isn't." He smiled faintly. "It's actually terrifying to say now, but I'm saying it anyway." She broke then, not from weakness, from relief, from the unbearable grace of being believed in by somebody who had every practical reason to panic and was choosing not to. She came around the table, sat partly on his lap in that awkward little kitchen, and held him so tightly it almost hurt. "I won't forget this," she whispered. "I swear I won't." He kissed her forehead. At the time, he believed her. The next 6 weeks turned Elijah into a man measured in transactions. He sold the old sedan first. It had dents near the passenger door and a transmission that complained in cold weather, but it still moved. It represented convenience, independence, the simple dignity of not waiting at bus stops in the rain. He let it go without ceremony. Then he emptied his small emergency savings. Then he pawned electronics. Then he picked up more repair work. Then more delivery shifts. Then overnight warehouse hours on weekends when his body should have been resting. He stopped buying lunch outside, stopped replacing worn clothes, stopped saying yes to anything that cost more than necessity. When coworkers joked that he was turning into a machine, he laughed because it was easier than explaining that he had made a private decision to become one. There was one thing he delayed longer than the others: his father's watch. It sat in a little box at the top of his closet shelf. Gold, but not flashy, heavy, but not oversized, worn at the edges from years of use. His father had not been a rich man. He had been a city bus driver with strong hands and a voice that could fill a room without ever needing to shout. He wore that watch to every important thing: church anniversaries, family portraits, holiday dinners, the day Elijah got his first full-time job. When his father died, the watch became more than jewelry. It became continuity, a reminder, a proof that manhood could be quiet and still solid. Elijah opened the box 3 different times before finally taking it. The third time, he stood in the pawn shop under harsh lights that made every object look lonelier than it probably was. The owner examined the watch with professional indifference, named a price, and waited. Elijah looked at the watch in his palm. He remembered his father adjusting the strap before leaving for work, remembered him laughing in the kitchen, remembered him telling young Elijah, "A man should be the kind of person whose word can outlive his money." The memory hit so hard Elijah nearly changed his mind. Then he thought of Simone, thought of that letter, thought of the life she could have if she got through this program, thought of the difference one generation's sacrifice can make for the next. He closed his fingers once hard, then opened them and set the watch down. "I'll take it," he said. The cash felt ugly in his pocket. Necessary. Useful. Ugly. Simone cried when she found out. Real tears. Angry tears, too. She slapped his arm lightly and asked why he had not told her before doing something that serious. He told her because if he had told her first, she would have begged him not to, and he had not trusted himself to hear that and still go through with it. She sat in silence for a while after that. Then she touched his cheek and said, "You believe in me more than I believe in myself." He answered without thinking, "That's my job." Maybe that was the first mistake. Not helping her, not loving her, not sacrificing. The mistake was turning devotion into duty so absolute that he forgot he was still a person inside it. The weeks before her departure passed in practical panic. Forms, embassy appointments, packing lists, last-minute documents, updated references, medical clearances, phone calls with people who knew somebody who had once studied abroad. Everything felt urgent. Nothing felt final until the airport. They stood there with two large suitcases, one carry-on, and a silence too emotional for either of them to name properly. Her mother had already cried. Her younger cousin had taken too many pictures. A church deacon had prayed over her near the terminal entrance. Now there was only the waiting. The final minutes before a dream turns into motion and everyone pretending not to notice that departure changes more than geography. Simone wore a dark coat because Elijah had insisted on buying one good warm piece before she left. He remembered the price more clearly than he wanted to. She had straightened her hair. Her nails were simple. Her face was composed in that careful way she used when she was holding too much emotion to let it spill. "I'm scared," she admitted at last. He nodded. "I know. What if I get there and everybody's ahead of me? What if I'm not as good as I thought? What if I embarrass myself? What if I can't handle it?" He stepped closer and adjusted the collar of her coat. "Then you breathe. Then you keep going. Then you remember you didn't come this far by accident." She stared at him. He could see the shine in her eyes now. "So that's it," she said quietly. "You're just going to stand here and make me cry in public." He smiled. "I'm trying to look strong. Please don't ruin the performance." She laughed through tears, and for one brief moment it felt like them again. Simple, close, honest. She touched his chest and said, "When I finish, I'm coming back for you." He took her hand, kissed it, and answered, "I'll be here." It sounded romantic then. Later it would sound tragic. The first month in Canada was hard but hopeful. Simone called often, sometimes late at night, sometimes between classes, sometimes from a laundromat or a grocery aisle, or outside in the cold. Her voice half shivering and half laughing about how brutal the weather felt. She told him about campus, about classmates from different backgrounds, about instructors who moved fast and expected faster, about the pressure, about the accent differences, about feeling smart one day and completely lost the next. He listened to all of it. He stayed on the phone while she cried from exhaustion. He talked her through panic. He sent money every time something unexpected came up. Textbooks, clinical shoes, transit card issues, a deposit error, a heating bill mismatch, a surprise lab fee. Each time he found a way. At first, the sacrifice felt meaningful because it still lived inside intimacy. She thanked him. She missed him. She sent photos of her coffee cup, her notes, the snow outside her window, the way the sky looked at 4 in the afternoon when winter darkness came too early. She told him she loved him at random moments that felt real. He lived on those moments. A man can survive more than he thinks when he believes what he is suffering for will return to him as shared joy. But distance has its own appetite. It eats routine first, then softness, then detail, then time. Then, if two people are not very careful, it starts eating interpretation itself. A delayed message becomes a possible slight. A short answer becomes a warning. Fatigue becomes coldness in the wrong mood. One missed call creates a story, then another, then another. By the third month, Simone's voice had changed in small ways. Not her accent, not her language, her emotional rhythm. She was more distracted, more rushed, less likely to linger. When Elijah asked how she was, she answered in summaries rather than confessions. When he told her about his day, she listened, but not all the way through. Her mind often seemed elsewhere. He noticed, of course he noticed, but he chose generosity in his interpretation because love that has invested too much often protects itself through denial. One night he called after finishing a late repair job, grease still under his nails, back aching, shoes wet from rain. He expected their usual bedtime conversation. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey, baby. You okay?" "Yeah, just busy." He smiled tiredly and sat on the edge of his bed. "Busy enough to forget I exist." "I didn't forget you." Her tone was flat, then softer. "I'm sorry. It's just been a lot." He let that pass. "How was clinical?" "Long." "You ate?" "Not really." "You need to stop doing that." A pause, then, "Did you send that transfer?" No hello after that. No question about his shift. No warmth to bridge the practical ask. Just the transfer. He stared at the wall for a second, then answered, "Yeah, about an hour ago." "Okay, good, thank you." Another silence. A small one, but loaded. He felt it. She probably did too. "How are you?" she asked at last, though it sounded like she remembered she was supposed to. He laughed softly without humor. "I'm breathing." "You're mad." "No." "He just tired." "You always say that." "Because I'm always tired." "That's not fair." He closed his eyes. The last thing he wanted was an argument built out of shared exhaustion. So he swallowed the hurt and smoothed his voice out. "I know. Forget it. Tell me what you need for next week." She told him. He wrote it down. After the call ended, he sat there longer than necessary, staring at the notebook in his lap. He could not have explained to anybody exactly why that conversation bothered him so much. Nothing huge had happened. No obvious cruelty. No dramatic betrayal. Just a subtle shift. The kind that makes your spirit uneasy before your mind has evidence. Marcus noticed the change before Elijah admitted it. Marcus had been his closest friend since high school. He owned a small barber shop that was always half business, a half neighborhood therapy center. Men came in for shape-ups and left having confessed things their own families did not know. Marcus was broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and incapable of pretending not to see what was in front of him. He loved Elijah enough to annoy him with truth. One Saturday afternoon, after Elijah nearly nodded off, waiting in the chair, Marcus clipped off the cape and said, "You look like a man financing his own heartbreak." Elijah opened one eye. "That's dramatic, even for you." Marcus folded his arms. "You lost weight, your eyes look sunken, and every time your phone lights up, you look scared before you look happy. I'm not stupid." Elijah leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "It's just long distance." Marcus gave him a look that said he had heard weaker excuses from stronger liars. "Maybe. Hey, but I've seen long distance. This looks like imbalance. Man, she's in another country trying to survive nursing school. Of course it's hard." "I didn't say it wasn't hard." Marcus lowered his voice. "I'm asking whether it still sounds like love when y'all talk, or just logistics." That question stayed in Elijah's chest all day, because he knew the answer was changing. Still, he defended her. To Marcus, to himself, to every private fear that tried to speak too loudly. He reminded himself she was under pressure. He reminded himself ambition has a cost. He reminded himself people become strange when they are fighting for their future. And perhaps all of that was true. But truth does not cancel warning signs. It only makes them harder to interpret cleanly. Winter came harder than expected. And the heating bill issue turned into a bigger housing problem. Simone needed emergency money again. Elijah picked up more shifts. There were mornings he felt his body resist standing. Mornings when he sat on the edge of the bed and needed a full minute before his legs agreed to carry him. He stopped mentioning how tired he was because it had become repetitive even to his own ears. Tired became his climate, his normal, his odor, his second skin. Yet when Simone called in tears after failing part of a practical assessment, he stayed awake with her until nearly dawn. He told her one bad day did not define a calling. He told her gifted people still struggle. He told her he believed in her when she did not believe in herself. By the end of that call, she was calmer. He, meanwhile, had to be at work in 2 hours. The strange thing about sacrifice is that it can make a person feel both powerful and invisible at the same time. Powerful because you are carrying more than most people know. Invisible because the more reliable you become, the more your suffering gets folded into expectation. Simone still said thank you, but less often. She still said she loved him, but sometimes like punctuation rather than emotion. He noticed that too. Not because he was needy, because love pays attention to temperature. Then one evening she posted a photo. It should not have mattered. People post photos. That is what the world does now. But this one bothered him immediately. She was standing near a waterfront at dusk, smiling in a way he had not seen in months. Not posed, not polite. Bright, unburdened. Alive in a way that startled him. The caption was simple. In some moments make the grind feel worth it. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing disloyal in the wording. But someone had taken the photo, and whoever took it knew how to make her laugh. When he asked later who she was with, she answered too quickly. Just classmates. He said okay, then hated that the word tasted like surrender. The weeks kept moving, and Elijah kept adjusting himself to the shape of a life that no longer felt balanced. He did not make one big dramatic choice to suffer. That is not how it usually happens. A person simply keeps saying yes to one more burden, then one more compromise, then one more explanation for somebody else's distance, until sacrifice becomes routine, and routine becomes identity. By early spring, his body had started sending warnings his mind did not have time to respect. His lower back throbbed after long repair jobs. His right wrist clicked when he lifted heavy tools. There were mornings his eyes burned so badly from lack of sleep that sunlight itself felt offensive. Still, he kept going, because every time he tried to calculate how close Simone was to finishing another term, his exhaustion rearranged itself into purpose. He did not think of himself as a victim. He thought of himself as part of the plan. That was the dangerous thing. When suffering is tied to meaning, it becomes very hard to question. Simone, meanwhile, was changing in ways that did not announce themselves all at once. At first it was style. Better coats, better boots. A new kind of polish in her photos. Not extravagant, but elevated. She looked sharper, more expensive, more at ease inside spaces that once might have intimidated her. In a way, Elijah wanted to be proud. A large part of him was. He had always believed she was meant to thrive. The problem was not that she seemed to be becoming more. The problem was that he increasingly felt like she was becoming more. Somewhere he was no longer invited to stand beside her. Their calls became shorter. Their laughs became rarer. Their miscommunications became easier to trigger and harder to repair. She was quick to irritation now, quick to interpret concern as pressure, quick to hear judgment inside questions he asked out of longing. One Thursday night, he called after finishing a delivery run. The city was damp from earlier rain. His shoes made tired sounds on the apartment steps as he climbed to his door. He balanced the phone between his shoulder and ear while fumbling for his keys. She answered with a distracted, hey. He smiled automatically anyway. Hey, you sound busy. I'm heading back from campus. At this hour, we had a group review. He let himself in, shut the door with his foot, and dropped his keys into the bowl by the wall. You ate yet? No. You gotta stop saying that like it's normal. Her exhale came through the phone sharper this time. Elijah, please. I'm tired. He stood still. The apartment felt especially quiet that night. No television, no music. Only the small hum of the fridge and the sound of his own patience trying not to crack. I know you're tired, he said gently. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying, take care of yourself. I am taking care of myself. That doesn't sound like it. There it was, the shift. Tiny but immediate. So now you're checking me, she said. He rubbed his forehead. No, I'm talking to the woman I love. You always do this. Do what? Make me feel like I'm failing some standard because I don't have energy to be soft all the time. He stared at the floor for a moment. That sentence bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Not just because it was unfair, because it suggested that tenderness toward him had become labor in her mind. He sat down slowly on the arm of the couch. I'm not asking for performance, Simone. I'm asking for us to still sound like us sometimes. Silence, then colder. I really can't do this tonight. The line did not disconnect, but it might as well have. He listened to the noise of traffic on her end, heard her breathe, and realized she was waiting for him to be the one who made this easier. Like always. So he did. He softened. He apologized. Hona, he asked about her week instead. And by the end of the call, the argument had dissolved the way many small relationship injuries do. Not healed, just dissolved into whatever person is most willing to swallow it. After he hung up, he sat in the dark for a long time. The thing about love is that it can train you to betray yourself politely. Not all at once, not in obvious ways, just little internal edits. You lower one expectation, then another. You accept less warmth, then less clarity. You stop asking certain questions because you know the answers will either hurt or be denied. Eventually, you become very skilled at carrying confusion quietly. Marcus was cutting a teenager's hair the next Saturday when Elijah walked into the shop looking half awake and fully somewhere else. Marcus took one look at him in the mirror and said, "Gosh, you look like bad news when an argument." Elijah managed a weak smile and sat on the bench by the window. A few minutes later, when the customer left, Marcus locked the door halfway and tossed Elijah a bottled water. "Talk." Elijah twisted the cap off and took a sip. "It's nothing," Marcus laughed. "Only men in deep trouble say that sentence with that face." Elijah leaned back and looked at the ceiling fan. "She's different." Marcus waited. "She's still there, still calling, still in the relationship, I guess. But it feels like she's standing farther away every time we talk. Like I'm speaking to somebody who already left the room and forgot to mention it." Marcus crossed his arms. "You think there's somebody else?" Elijah answered too quickly. "No." That alone said enough. When Marcus lowered himself into the barber chair opposite him and spoke more quietly. "I'm not trying to poison your head. I'm trying to protect your heart from pretending not to know what it knows." Elijah looked at him. "What if it's just school?" "It might be." Marcus nodded once. "But if your spirit keeps flinching, there's usually a reason." Elijah hated how true that felt. Still, he did what loyal men often do when faced with warning signs they do not want to read clearly. He doubled down on goodness. He sent flowers to her apartment on the anniversary of the day they met. She texted thanks, but not the long emotional message he expected. He wrote her a paragraph one Sunday about how proud he was of her perseverance. She responded with 3 heart emojis and a promise to call later, then forgot. He mailed her a care package with snacks she liked, vitamins, hand cream, and a hoodie that still smelled faintly like his detergent. When she received it, she sounded touched for almost 6 whole minutes. He held on to those minutes like a thirsty man holds on to rain. Meanwhile, his own life was narrowing around work. He had become excellent at managing exhaustion. There were evenings he changed clothes in parking lots between jobs. Afternoons, he took 10-minute naps in his truck before driving across town for another repair call. Mornings, he stood under cold water just to shock himself awake enough to function. His coworkers respected him. Some admired him. One older supervisor named Vernon once clapped him on the shoulder after a long maintenance shift and said, "Whatever you're building must be one hell of a future." Elijah smiled and said, "I hope so." That answer haunted him later, because hope had started to feel less like confidence and more like a habit he was afraid to break. As graduation came closer, Simone's social world appeared more frequently online. Study groups, hospital rotations, birthday dinners, small celebrations, photos outside restaurants, winter lights, campus events. Nothing explicitly wrong, nothing any reasonable partner could point to and say, "There, that is betrayal." But betrayal does not always announce itself through facts first. Sometimes it arrives through atmosphere, through the sense that someone else is now receiving the version of a person you used to know intimately. One night, while scrolling through photos she had been tagged in, Elijah saw him for the first time. Nathan. He did not know the name yet, only the face. Tall, clean-shaven, well-dressed in that effortless, expensive casual way some men wear like second skin. He was standing in a group of 6 people at what looked like a restaurant celebration. Nothing compromising, nothing scandalous. But Simone was angled toward him, not by accident, not enough to prove anything, enough to plant a splinter. Elijah stared at the image longer than he should have, then hated himself for staring, then hated the fact that he had become the kind of man who studied pictures for emotional clues because direct reassurance no longer felt available. He mentioned the photo 2 days later, trying to sound casual. That dinner looked nice, he said. Who was everybody? She named 2 women he knew from previous stories. A guy from her program, another classmate, then after a tiny pause, and Nathan. He kept his tone light. Nathan. Yeah, he's in one of my clinical groups. That the one in the gray coat? Probably, I don't remember. That answer hit him strangely. Not because she had to remember every detail, because it sounded like the kind of deliberate vagueness people use when they do remember too well. He said nothing for a few seconds. She noticed. What? Nothing. Elijah. He looked out the kitchen window at the parking lot below. Nothing. I just asked. Her voice tightened. Please don't start creating issues because I took a picture with classmates. I didn't create anything. You're doing that thing. What thing? That suspicious thing. Like every time I mention another human being, you have to measure it. He closed his eyes. Here again, the pattern. His discomfort turned into his offense. Her defensiveness turned into his apology. He was so tired of the choreography, but not yet strong enough to leave the dance. So again, he backed down. I'm not trying to fight, he said. Good, because I really don't have time for insecurity. That word sat in his chest like a stone. Not because insecurity is shameful, because she used it as a weapon, a way to make his intuition sound childish. After they hung up, he opened the photo again. This time he looked at Simone's smile. Not Nathan, her. And what unsettled him was not flirtation. It was ease. She looked easy there, unburdened, the kind of ease she no longer brought into conversations with him. Spring turned warmer. When Simone moved into the final stretch of her program, capstone requirements, final evaluations, licensing prep, everything intensified. Elijah expected this season to pull them back together. People nearing the finish line often get sentimental, reflective, grateful. He thought maybe she would look around and remember who had been carrying the weight beneath her climb. Maybe graduation would restore perspective. Instead, she became even more distant. Sometimes he would send a long message in the morning and get a thumbs-up reaction at night. Sometimes she would promise to call and then text at midnight that she had fallen asleep. Once, after he had sent money for exam fees and apartment rent in the same week, she forgot to mention whether it had arrived. He waited 2 days before asking. She responded with, yes, I got it, as if he had asked whether the weather was clear. He read that text 3 times. Not because it was devastating in itself, because carelessness has a way of exposing emotional hierarchy. People do not become thoughtless with everyone equally. They become thoughtless where they assume forgiveness is permanent. That Sunday, his mother called him after church. Gloria Carter had a voice that could move from prayer to warning without changing volume. She knew her son well enough to hear weariness, even when he tried to hide it under politeness. You sound thin, she said. He laughed softly. That's a new one. I mean in the spirit. She paused. You all right? He leaned against the counter and looked at the stack of unopened mail near the fruit bowl. Just tired. Ma. You keep saying that like it is a full testimony. He smiled despite himself. She continued. I know you love that girl. I know you've done a lot. Maybe too much. But hear me carefully. Never pour so completely into another person's becoming that you disappear from your own life. He swallowed. Mothers have a way of touching truths you did not invite into the room. She's almost done, he said quietly. It'll be better after that. There was a long pause. Then Gloria said, I pray so, but I did not ask what happens after she finishes. I asked what is happening to you now. He had no clean answer. Graduation invitations were emailed out near the end of the term. Simone sent him the digital copy after almost a full day's delay. Here, she wrote, in case you still want to come. in case you still want to come. He stared at that sentence and felt something inside him pull tight. Still want to come. As though there had been doubt. As though he had not built half his life around this moment. As though his presence was optional in a story he had helped pay for, with sleep, sweat, and memory. He called her immediately. She answered after 2 rings. What? He almost laughed at the greeting. What do you mean, in case I still want to come? A pause, then, irritated already. Elijah, don't do this. Do what? Ask why you phrased it like I'm some random guest. You're reading too much into a message. Am I? Yes. She sounded exhausted. Everything has to become emotional with you lately. That hurt more than he expected, because he had spent years lowering his needs, filtering his pain, smoothing his tone, and absorbing distance just to avoid overwhelming her. Now even his attempt to name hurt was being treated as indulgence. He spoke carefully. I've been waiting for this day with you from the beginning. I know that. Do you? Another silence, heavy this time. Then she exhaled. Look, I'm under a lot of pressure. I don't have the energy to keep reassuring you every time you feel something. That sentence did not sound tired. It sounded revealing. Elijah sat down slowly at the table. I'm not asking for reassurance every time I feel something, he said. I'm asking not to be made to feel like wanting closeness from my own partner is an inconvenience. She did not answer right away, and in that silence he felt a strange grief move through him, because part of him knew this was no longer just stress, no longer just academic pressure, no longer just long-distance strain. Something fundamental had shifted in how she viewed him. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, but not warmer. I can't do this tonight. Please. He looked at the invitation on his phone screen, at her full name, at the date, at the ceremony location, at the image of a future he had once believed would include him naturally. Fine, he said at last. I'm coming. She answered, okay. No excitement, no relief, just okay. The flight cost more than he wanted to admit. He booked it anyway. Then he bought one decent suit. Navy, simple, tailored enough to look respectable. He got the sleeves adjusted by a local seamstress who said, "You must be going somewhere important," and smiled when he nodded. He bought a necklace too. Small, elegant, a graduation gift. Not flashy, just thoughtful. He imagined giving it to her after the ceremony, maybe over dinner, maybe in a quiet moment when the crowds were gone and they could finally exhale together. He imagined her crying, smiling, telling him she knew he had carried her through the hardest years of her life. He imagined their bond deepening through the memory of what they had survived. That was the thing about Elijah. Even after all the warning signs, he still wanted the story to redeem itself. Not because he was stupid, because hope can become a person's final loyalty when everything else is fraying. Marcus drove him to the airport. On the way there, they passed familiar blocks, closed storefronts, kids riding bikes too close to traffic, a woman carrying grocery bags up a cracked sidewalk. When the city looked ordinary in the way places do when they are full of people's unfinished battles. Marcus kept both hands on the wheel and said very little at first. Then halfway to the terminal, he said, "Whatever happens up there, keep your dignity." Elijah looked out the window. "You say that like you know something." "I know enough." Marcus glanced at him briefly. "I know you've been forcing yourself not to see what's been happening. And I know men in love will walk into pain smiling if they think it buys one more chance at the dream." Elijah did not answer. Marcus continued, "I'm not saying she's guilty of the worst thing you can imagine. I'm saying your heart has been getting bad news in pieces for months. Don't arrive there ready to explain away all of it." Elijah rubbed his thumb over the small jewelry box in his coat pocket. "Han, I just want to get through the ceremony." Marcus let out a breath. "That's fair. Just remember who you are while you do." The flight was long enough for memory to become torture. Elijah spent part of it staring at clouds, part of it pretending to sleep, and part of it replaying old versions of Simone in his head. Simone laughing over grocery store nonsense. Simone asleep on his chest after a double shift. Simone saying she would never forget what he did for her. Simone crying over the watch. Simone promising to come back for him. Promises sound different when you have enough distance to hear the conditions hidden inside them. When he landed, the cold bit harder than expected. He zipped his coat, picked up his bag, and texted her. "I'm here." No response. He waited near baggage claim. Still nothing. He took a taxi to the modest hotel he had booked near campus. Checked in, set his bag down, texted again. "Let me know when you're free." An hour later, she finally answered. "Busy with classmates. Can meet later at cafe near campus." He read the message slowly. Busy with classmates. No exclamation marks. No, "I can't wait to see you." No, "You made it." No warmth proportionate to the fact that the man who had funded, defended, and loved her through years of strain had just crossed a border to celebrate her. He told himself not to overreact. Jet lag and hurt make bad interpreters. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she was genuinely caught up. Maybe this was only another awkward moment in a difficult season. So he showered, pressed his shirt, laid the suit out carefully, set the necklace box beside his wallet. Then he stepped out and bought flowers from a small shop on the corner. White and pale pink, simple, graceful. He liked the arrangement because it looked hopeful without being childish. The cafe sat near a row of campus buildings with wide windows and late afternoon foot traffic. Students moved past in clusters, laughing into the cold, carrying backpacks and takeaway cups, dressed like people whose entire lives still believed in next chapters. Elijah arrived early and chose a table near the window. He placed the flowers carefully beside him. Then he waited. Waiting is easier when your heart feels safe. When it doesn't, every minute starts picking at you. He checked his phone. No message. He looked outside. Nothing. He adjusted his sleeve, straightened the flower paper, looked again. Then he saw her. She was walking toward the cafe from the far end of the street, and at first all he felt was relief. There she was, Simone, the woman he had crossed countries to see, the woman whose name had lived inside his labor for years. She looked beautiful. That was his first thought. Not glamorous in a forced way, confident, polished, changed. Then he saw the man beside her. The sight did not hit all at once. It arrived in layers. First the outline, then the coat, then the way they moved at the same pace, then the hand resting at the small of her back with unconscious familiarity. Then Simone laughing at something he said. Nathan. Elijah knew without being told. His fingers tightened around the flower stems so hard they almost bent. The entire street seemed to lose sound for one long, impossible second. His heartbeat did not speed up. It slowed, like his body was trying to conserve itself for impact. She looked up, saw him, and everything in her face changed. For one suspended second, Elijah still tried to save the moment in his mind before it fully turned against him. That is what love does when it is cornered. It bargains with reality even after reality has started speaking clearly. He told himself there could still be an explanation, a decent one, a survivable one. Maybe the hand on her back meant nothing. Maybe campus culture was more casual. Maybe this was only a cruel angle from a cruel distance. Maybe the universe had lined up the wrong details in the wrong order, and his tired heart was doing the rest. Then Simone slowed, not with the joy of a woman seeing the man who had carried her through years of struggle, not with the warmth of surprise, with hesitation. That hesitation told the truth before her mouth did. The man beside her followed her gaze toward the window. He saw Elijah. He saw the flowers. He saw enough. His posture changed almost instantly, not guilty exactly, alert, like somebody who had just realized a private arrangement had entered public light. Elijah stood before they even reached the door. His body moved on instinct. The flowers felt stupid in his hand now, too soft for the violence of what was happening, too hopeful, too innocent. Simone pushed the cafe door open first. Cold air followed her inside. Nathan came in just behind her. For a second, all three of them stood inside the smell of coffee and steamed milk and ordinary conversation. And Elijah had the surreal sensation that the room should have noticed, that somebody should have looked up and said, this is a sacred disaster. Please lower the music." But nothing happened. A barista called another name. A student laughed at something on a phone screen. A chair scraped the floor. The world remained offensively normal. "Elijah," Simone said. The way she said his name was not loving, not relieved. It sounded like the beginning of damage control. He nodded once. Simone? He looked at Nathan briefly. The man gave a small, respectful nod, but did not speak. Elijah noticed details with painful clarity. The expensive coat, the watch, the easy confidence of a man who had not spent the last 3 years learning how much he could erase himself in the name of love. Nathan was handsome. That was true. But what hurt Elijah more was not the man's face. It was his ease. The way he stood close to Simone without uncertainty. The way his silence suggested place, not confusion. Elijah turned back to her. For a second, he almost handed her the flowers out of habit. Then he stopped. His arm lowered slowly. I came early, he said. His own voice sounded far away. I figured that for once, I should be the one waiting. Simone looked at the flowers, then away. That movement cut him more sharply than if she had slapped him. We should sit, she said quickly. We should sit. Not, I'm sorry, not this isn't what it looks like. Not, please, let me explain. Already she was arranging posture before truth. They sat at a small table near the window. Nathan remained standing for half a second too long, clearly unsure of what role he was supposed to play in this scene. Then Simone looked up at him and said, You can sit. So he did. That was when Elijah felt the first clean break inside himself. Not because Nathan sat, because she made room for him, publicly, comfortably enough to say it out loud. The man who had come carrying flowers and years of sacrifice had become emotionally secondary in real time. Elijah placed the flowers on the table anyway. Not for romance now, for dignity. He needed his hands free. No one spoke at first. Finally, Elijah looked at Simone and asked the only question that mattered. What is this? She swallowed. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Then she glanced once at Nathan, as if borrowing courage from his presence. This is Nathan, she said softly. You remember, I mentioned him before. Elijah almost laughed, not because anything was funny. Because betrayal often arrives wrapped in language so absurd, the mind rejects it on contact. You remember, I mentioned him before, as though recognition were the issue, as though the problem was not that the air between them had already explained far more than her sentence did. He turned to Nathan. Do you know who I am? Nathan's jaw shifted. He answered carefully. Yes. That one word told Elijah more than he wanted to know. Not maybe, not I think so. Yes, clear, confirmed. The other man had known enough to keep walking beside her anyway, known enough to enter a cafe where another man waited with flowers and still sit down. Elijah nodded slowly. Then he looked back at Simone. So I'm not confused, he said. You knew I was coming. You knew I crossed a border to be here. Oh, and you still showed up with him. Her eyes flashed with discomfort. It's not like that. He leaned back. Then tell me what it is like. She looked trapped now, not because she had nowhere to go, because truth was finally in the room and refusing to stay abstract. She inhaled, exhaled, and chose what she probably thought was the gentlest version. Elijah, things have changed. He stared at her. Of all the cowardly sentences people use when they want the effect of honesty without the burden of detail, that one might be the worst. Things have changed. No owner, no timeline, no accountability, just vague weather where deliberate action should have been named. He asked quietly, Changed how? Simone lowered her eyes to the table. Then, without looking at him, she said, We've grown into different people. Nathan looked away. Why, even he seemed ashamed of the script. Elijah felt a strange calm move into him. Not peace, not acceptance. The kind of calm that enters a person when the wound finally becomes visible enough to stop guessing about. Pain is terrible, but uncertainty has its own cruelty. Now at least there was shape. Different people, he repeated. He nodded once. Okay, let's not speak in riddles. Are you with him? Simone closed her eyes for a second. Elijah, are you with him? A longer silence. Then almost inaudibly, yes. It was such a small word for something that could dismantle years. The cafe around them kept moving. Someone at the counter asked for extra sugar. A spoon clinked against ceramic. A door opened and shut. Elijah noticed everything except his own breathing. He did not shout. That surprised even him. Or maybe because rage needs energy, and heartbreak had already spent too much of his. How long? He asked. Simone finally looked at him. Her face was tense now, her eyes bright with shame and stubbornness, fighting each other for dominance. It wasn't planned. He let out one hard breath through his nose. That's not what I asked. Nathan shifted in his chair like a man considering whether decency required him to leave. He stayed. That too told Elijah something ugly. Simone's voice thinned. A few months. Elijah nodded again, too slowly, as if moving carefully might stop the whole moment from shattering completely. A few months, he said. So while I was sending money, while I was working, while I was planning to be here, you were building this. Her face hardened then, not fully, but enough. The defensive self had arrived. And the one that appears when guilt feels too exposing and empathy begins to feel like self-accusation. It's not that simple. He looked at her with exhausted disbelief. What part gets simpler if we keep talking? She leaned forward, lowered her voice and said, You don't understand what my life has become here. There it was, the beginning of justification. Elijah had heard enough emotional argument over the years to recognize when someone was about to frame betrayal as evolution. He answered carefully. You're right. I don't understand what it feels like to study there, to live there, to be in that environment every day. But I do understand what it feels like to build my life around helping you survive it. So don't sit here and talk to me like I'm some stranger commenting from the outside. Nathan looked down at the table. Simone pressed her lips together. You want the truth, she said at last. He gave a small, hollow laugh. That would be new, yeah. She flinched. Good. At least some part of her could still recognize injury. Then she spoke, and every sentence seemed chosen to save herself first. I got here and everything changed. The pace, the expectations, the people, the kind of life this career could actually open up for me. She swallowed. I started seeing things differently. He watched her. Her tone had shifted now. Not emotional, conceptual. That frightened him more. Because when people intellectualize cruelty, it usually means they have rehearsed it. How differently? She hesitated, then said the thing that would live in him long after the rest blurred. I can't keep building my future around struggle. Elijah said nothing. There are moments when pain becomes so precise it briefly leaves the body and enters pure understanding. That sentence was one of them. Not around dishonesty, not around incompatibility, not around distance, around struggle. She had named him without using his name, reduced years of sacrifice into an atmosphere she no longer wanted attached to her future. The man who had sold his car, sold his father's watch, worked until his body trembled, and financed her climb had become, in her mind, the smell of lack on clothes she was preparing to discard. Nathan looked visibly uncomfortable now. Good. Let him be. Some men deserve a front-row seat to the consequences of the comfort they borrow. Elijah leaned back in his chair and stared at Simone for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so calm it startled her. And so that's what I became to you. Her eyes filled slightly. That's not what I mean. It's exactly what you mean. No. Her voice sharpened. You always do this. You take one thing and make it the ugliest version possible. He almost smiled. The audacity of being accused of distortion by the person who had spent months editing him out of her life while accepting his support. The ugliest version possible, he repeated softly. Simone, you brought another man to meet the one who paid for you to stand where you are. I promise you, I do not have enough imagination to make this uglier than it already is. That landed. She looked away. Nathan finally spoke. His voice was controlled, respectful, low. Maybe I should go. Elijah turned toward him. For a second, he thought about saying something vicious, something memorable, something masculine and wounded and sharp enough to stain the man's confidence on the way out. But real devastation rarely wastes itself on theatrics. No, Elijah said. Stay. You should hear this too. Nathan went still. Elijah looked at both of them now, not wildly, not as a man begging, as a man taking inventory of the final scene of a long deception. I need to ask one thing, he said to Simone. When was I supposed to find out? She blinked. What? When? He held her gaze. After the ceremony. After dinner. After I gave you your gift. Or were you just going to let me celebrate you first and then tell me I no longer fit the life I paid to help build? Her lips trembled. That was the first truly human crack in her since the conversation began. Because he was right. There had been a plan, or at least a postponement, or a selfish one that required him to remain useful and manageable until the timing suited her. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered. He nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said. Tears slipped into her voice now. I never wanted to hurt you. He laughed then, a small broken sound. Then you should have tried honesty before convenience. Silence pressed down on the table. Elijah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small jewelry box. For a brief second, Simone's eyes widened with recognition. Gift, graduation, care, the old language between them. He placed it carefully on the table. I bought this for you, he said, before I saw what I was really walking into. She looked at the box like it might burn her. Then he pushed the flowers slightly forward too. The white and pale pink arrangement suddenly looked almost cruel in its innocence. These two. Elijah, she began. No. He raised a hand gently, not angrily. Let me finish. You don't get to shape the ending too. That shut the room down. Even Nathan sat straighter. Elijah continued. I loved you honestly, completely. Probably more than I should have. I believed in you when believing in you cost me pieces of my own life. And I did it gladly because I thought we were building something together. He paused. The words were steady, but his chest felt like it had glass in it. If you had fallen out of love and told me the truth before all this, it still would have destroyed me. But I could have respected the honesty. Anyway, what I can't respect is turning my loyalty into a bridge you crossed on your way to deciding I was too close to the life you wanted to leave behind. Simone was crying quietly now. Not loud, not enough to interrupt, just enough to reveal that the truth was still finding flesh. Nathan opened his mouth once as if to speak, then thought better of it. Elijah looked at him anyway. You knew about me, Nathan answered carefully. Yes. And you stayed. A pause, then, yes. Elijah nodded. I won't forget that. Nathan accepted it. He did not defend himself. Maybe because there was no defense that did not sound pathetic. Simone wiped under one eye with trembling fingers. I didn't use you. That was the sentence that nearly broke Elijah's composure. He leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just closer. His face changed then. Shidio not loud, not wild, only stripped. Every softened interpretation gone. You took money from a man you had already started emotionally replacing. His voice was barely above a murmur. You let me keep sacrificing while you kept withholding the truth. If that's not using somebody, then tell me what word you'd prefer so the lie sounds prettier. She had no answer. For the first time since they sat down, Simone looked small. Not because he overpowered her, because her own choices had finally removed every elegant language she had been using to protect herself from herself. A tear slid down her cheek, then another. She looked at the box again, at the flowers, at his suit, at the visible evidence that he had come to honor her. And perhaps in that moment, she truly saw what she had done. Not in theory, in scene. A faithful man crossing countries with gifts in his hands, meeting the woman he loved already accompanied by the life she had chosen over him. I'm sorry, she whispered. He believed she meant it. That was the sad part. She was sorry, just not early enough for sorry to be noble. He stood. The movement startled both of them. He adjusted his coat once, slowly, to make sure his hands were not shaking visibly. Then he looked at Simone one last time. I hope you become everything you worked for, he said, and I hope one day you understand the difference between outgrowing hardship and betraying the people who stood inside it with you. Her mouth opened, but no words came. He turned to Nathan. Take care of her. Nathan looked almost ashamed to receive the sentence. He gave a quiet nod. Elijah picked up nothing. Not the flowers. Not the gift. He left both on the table. Then he walked out. The cold outside hit him like a physical slap. The sky had deepened toward evening. Streetlights were beginning to wake. Students moved past him in coats and scarves, carrying coffees, laughing, arguing, living inside their own unfinished stories. None of them knew that a man had just walked out of the wreckage of a love he had nearly organized his life around. None of them knew that a simple cafe now held the grave of a future he had fed with years of labor. The anonymity of that hurt felt almost insulting. He kept walking, not because he knew where he was going, because stopping felt impossible. The city looked beautiful in a way heartbreak always resents. Clean sidewalks, sharp air, glass windows lit gold from the inside, people meeting for dinner, cars moving steadily, a dog tugging a woman cheerfully across an intersection. Somewhere nearby, somebody was laughing so freely it sounded like another language. Elijah shoved his hands into his coat pockets and walked faster. He thought about the airport goodbye, about her promise to come back for him, about the phone calls where she cried and he stayed awake through dawn, about the money transfers, about the watch. God, the watch. He had traded part of his father's memory so she could continue becoming the kind of woman who would one day call him struggle. That thought almost folded him in half. He reached the waterfront without planning to. Black water moved under evening light, quiet and indifferent. He found a bench and sat down hard. For several minutes, he felt nothing at all. That frightened him more than tears would have. It was as if his body had shut certain doors to prevent total collapse. He watched the water. A couple passed behind him. A bike rolled by. The wind sharpened. Then his phone buzzed. Simone. He looked at the screen until it stopped. A moment later, it buzzed again. Then again. He turned the phone face down beside him on the bench. Eventually, the messages came instead. Please don't leave like this. Can we talk? I'm sorry. Please answer. He let them sit unread. He was not strong enough to read them and still remained standing inside himself. Silence was the only boundary he had left that did not require explanation. The first tear came without warning. Just one. Then another. Then suddenly his body remembered what had happened, and grief moved through him with an honesty so raw it felt almost indecent under open sky. He bent forward and covered his face. There was nothing cinematic about it. No dramatic shout, no speech. Only the ugly private sound of a man discovering that his love had survived years of strain, only to be discarded once its usefulness had matured into someone else's convenience. He stayed like that a long time. At some point, Marcus called. Elijah stared at the phone and nearly ignored it, then answered. Yo, Marcus said immediately. His voice was light at first, then sharper. You with her? Elijah swallowed. The sound that came out of him did not qualify as yes or no. Marcus went quiet, then very softly, talk to me. Elijah looked at the water and forced the words out in pieces. Aka, she brought him. To the cafe, she brought him. There was a silence on the line so deep it almost made distance disappear. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had gone flat with controlled anger. You serious? Elijah laughed once. A broken sound. I guess I look like a joke to everybody but me. Don't say that. She said she can't build her future around struggle. He pressed his fist against his mouth. She said it like I was a season she outgrew. Marcus cursed under his breath. Long, creative, vicious. Then he said, listen to me. You hear me? Elijah did not answer. Marcus raised his voice slightly. Elijah, hear me. I'm here. She did something ugly. That's on her, not you. You did not get played because you were weak. You got betrayed because you were real in a world full of people who only respect what glitters. Do not turn her failure into your identity. Elijah shut his eyes. Fresh tears pushed through anyway. I sold my father's watch, he said. The sentence came out like confession, like injury, like an accusation against himself. Marcus inhaled sharply on the other end. Then he answered with a steadiness that probably cost him effort. And that watch did what you gave it for. It helped somebody you love become something better. What she chose to do with that gift is her sin, not yours. Elijah breathed hard through his nose. He wanted to believe him. He was not there yet. Marcus kept talking, voice low and firm. Get back to the hotel. Pack your stuff. Sleep if you can. Come home. Do not meet her again tonight. Do not let guilt dress itself up as closure. You already got the truth. Elijah looked at the dark water one last time, then slowly sat upright. Yeah, he said. Promise me. A pause, then. I promise. He ended the call and sat there another minute. Then he stood. By the time he got back to the hotel, the city had fully entered night. His room was small but clean. A bed, a desk, a lamp with two white light, a curtain partially open over the street below. It looked like the kind of room people pass through on their way to better chapters. Tonight it felt like an emergency shelter for a soul. His phone had 12 messages from Simone, then 15, then a voicemail. He listened to none of them. Instead, he took off his coat, loosened his tie, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the opposite wall until his thoughts began to blur from exhaustion. At some point, he lay down without undressing fully. At some point, tears dried on his face. At some point, morning came. He attended the graduation ceremony anyway. Not for her, for himself. He sat high in the auditorium, far enough back that he could leave without being stopped, close enough to see her walk. When her name was called, the crowd around him clapped. He clapped once too, quietly, a private acknowledgement of the version of love he had once carried into this dream. Then he stood, turned before the next name finished echoing, and walked out. He did not wait outside, did not text, did not ask for the flowers or the necklace. Let them stay with her. Let them rot in memory if they needed to. The flight home felt longer than the trip there. Not because of miles, because illusions are heavy when they die. He sat by the window again, but this time he did not revisit old sweet memories. He thought instead about warning signs, about the little humiliations he had renamed patience, about how often his discomfort had been turned into his apology, about the simple fact that a person can be deeply loved and still choose convenience over character. That truth was hard, but once seen, it offered a strange clarity. When he landed, Marcus was waiting near arrivals. They did not hug immediately. Marcus just looked at him, really looked, then took Elijah's bag and said, "Come on." Halfway to the parking lot, Elijah stopped walking. Marcus turned. "What?" Elijah's face tightened, then broke. Not fully, just enough. "I don't know how to be this stupid and still respect myself." Marcus stepped closer and put a hand on the back of his neck, the way older brothers do when words are not enough by themselves. "You respect yourself," Marcus said, "by understanding that loving hard was never the stupid part." They stood there a moment longer, then kept walking. Back home, the apartment felt changed. Not because anything in it had moved, because betrayal rearranges meaning faster than furniture. The little table where they once planned budgets, the couch where he had fallen asleep during long calls, the corner where he had stacked shipment receipts and transfer confirmations. Everything now looked like evidence. For the first week, Elijah moved through life like a man returning from a place nobody else could see. He went to work. He answered basic questions. He showered. He slept badly. He ignored Simone's messages, then blocked her number when her persistence started feeling less like remorse and more like refusal to accept consequences. He did not hate her every hour. That would have been easier in some ways. What he felt was worse. He missed her and despised what she had done. He remembered tenderness and heard cruelty layered over it. He wanted justice. He wanted sleep. He wanted to go backward and forward at the same time. One evening, he stood in the bathroom looking at himself in the mirror and hardly recognized the man staring back. Same face, same scars, same eyes, but something was missing. Trust, maybe, or innocence, or the soft assumption that love, if fed enough, will naturally become safe. He touched the sink with both hands and whispered to his reflection, "Get up." It sounded ridiculous, but he said it again. Get up. The first month after the betrayal did not feel dramatic. It felt mechanical. That was worse. Pain with noise at least has movement in it. Pain that goes quiet can settle into the walls. It can sit at the edge of your bed. It can stand with you at the sink while you brush your teeth. It can ride beside you to work and say nothing all day, then wait faithfully for you at night. That was how Elijah's heartbreak behaved. It became a presence. Not theatrical, not loud, just constant. He woke up tired even after sleeping. He ate because the body requires maintenance, not because hunger still felt connected to pleasure. He answered coworkers in complete sentences while feeling half absent inside them. He learned how to look normal without actually returning to normal. That skill frightened him a little. How quickly a person can become fluent in functioning while damaged. At work, Vernon noticed it first. The older supervisor had the kind of face that seemed permanently carved by weather, disappointment, and earned wisdom. He did not ask emotional questions often, which is why the one afternoon he leaned against a utility cart and said, "You still here with us, son?" The sentence landed harder than expected. Elijah tightened a bolt on the HVAC panel in front of him and forced out a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." Vernon gave him a look that said he had seen too many men use exhaustion as a disguise for collapse. "Well," he said quietly, "tired men still need to watch where they place their hands. Pain'll have you careless." Elijah nodded. That was all. But he carried the warning. Because Vernon was right, he had started making tiny mistakes. Not dangerous ones. Not yet. A missed tool. A forgotten follow-up. A moment of staring too long at nothing before remembering what he was in the middle of doing. Grief had entered his concentration. At home, the apartment no longer felt like a shared launch pad. It felt like a museum of misjudgment. The folded blanket she used to pull over herself during calls. The old mug she liked when she was still living there. A receipt tucked into a drawer from the day they celebrated her acceptance letter with cheap takeout and expensive hope. Every object had become bilingual. It still spoke memory. Now it also spoke humiliation. Marcus came by often during those weeks. Not in a suffocating way. He did not sit on Elijah like pity. He just refused to let silence take too much territory. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he brought jokes too disrespectful to be repeated in church. Sometimes he brought no conversation at all and just sat there while a game played on television neither of them really watched. That is one of the holiest forms of friendship, the kind that does not demand performance from your pain. One Friday evening, he found Elijah standing in the kitchen, staring at a stack of transfer receipts he had dug out of a drawer. Marcus took one look and said, "No, put those down." Elijah did not move. "I just wanted to see it." "See what?" "How long I kept helping after she was already gone." Marcus walked over, took the papers from his hand, and set them face down on the counter. "You do not need a spreadsheet to prove what betrayal already proved." Elijah leaned both palms against the edge of the sink. His voice dropped lower. "I'm trying to understand how I missed it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't miss all of it. You kept forgiving what should have been confronted. Because you loved her, and because some part of you believed if you stayed consistent enough, the story would return to the version you deserved." Elijah shut his eyes. That was too accurate to resist. He had known. Not fully, not enough to name it all, but enough to feel the tremors. He had simply chosen hope each time truth asked for harsher recognition. "She made me feel needy for noticing distance," Elijah said. "She made me feel weak for asking for warmth." Marcus nodded once. "That's how some people protect their guilt. They turn your intuition into your flaw." The sentence stayed with Elijah for days. Simone kept trying at first. New numbers, emails, messages through mutual contacts. One absurdly careful note through social media that began with, "I know I don't deserve a response, but..." He stopped reading after the first line. Blocked that too. Not because he was healed, because he was trying to survive. It would have been easier, in a simple way, if she had become pure villain in his mind, if every memory had rotted instantly, if all tenderness had evaporated and left behind only anger. But grief is more complicated than that. He still remembered the woman in the small apartment kitchen crying over her acceptance letter, still remembered her clutching him at the airport, still remembered her voice from those first cold nights in Canada, frightened and grateful and exhausted. Those memories had not been fake. That was part of the ache. A real love had existed there. It just had not remained protected by both people. One Sunday after church, his mother came over carrying a foil pan of baked chicken, sweet potatoes, and green beans that smelled like somebody still believed life should continue. Gloria Carter did not rush comfort. She moved through his apartment like a woman who knew exactly where grief likes to sit and intended to reclaim the room by force if necessary. She put food in his fridge, opened the windows for a while, changed the flowers on the table even though nobody had bought any. Then she sat down across from him and folded her hands. "Tell me the truth now," she said. "No edited version." Elijah looked down at his own hands. For a while he said nothing. Then it all came out. Not in the same order it happened. Payne rarely tells stories chronologically. He told her about the cafe, about Nathan, about the sentence on struggle, about attending the ceremony from the back and leaving before it ended, about the watch. When he said that part, his voice cracked for the first time. His mother's face changed, but not into shock, more like sorrow finding the place it already suspected. When he finished, she stayed quiet a moment. Then she reached forward and took his hand. "Baby," she said softly, using the old childhood word that only mothers can make dignified inside a grown man's heartbreak. "You did not lose because you loved deeply. You lost because she forgot that love is not supposed to be measured only by what looks impressive from the outside." He stared at the table. She continued, "Do you know what some people worship?" He shook his head faintly. "Arrival. They worship being seen to have arrived. And once a person starts worshiping that, anybody who reminds them of the road can begin to feel embarrassing, even if that person carried them." Her eyes sharpened. "That is not your shame. It is hers." He swallowed hard. Something inside him loosened then. Not healed, loosened. Sometimes all a wounded person needs is for someone wise to return the guilt to its rightful owner. His mother stayed for dinner, made him eat more than he wanted, prayed before leaving, one hand on his shoulder, asking God not just to comfort him, but to prevent bitterness from disguising itself as wisdom. That line mattered, because bitterness had begun whispering seductive things. Never build with anyone again. Never trust need. Never admire ambition in a woman. Never give beyond what is written in contract. All those thoughts arrived wearing the mask of self-protection. But Elijah knew enough, even then, to fear becoming smaller in response to pain. Still, wisdom did come, hard-earned, unromantic, specific. He began to notice how often he had treated his own depletion like proof of devotion, how naturally he had accepted being the more understanding one, the more patient one, the more flexible one, how he had mistaken endurance for intimacy. Love should survive difficulty, yes, but it should not require one person to disappear so the other can remain comfortably ascending. One rainy evening, after a long repair shift, he stopped at a convenience store to buy water and a sandwich. The cashier was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a playful mouth who had seen him enough times to know he was one of the regulars who never bought anything indulgent. "You look like life been charging you interest," she said as she scanned the items. He almost smiled. "That obvious." "Baby, your face looked like a sad Monday." He gave a real laugh then, brief but genuine. It surprised him. As she bagged the sandwich, she tapped a display near the counter. "You should buy a ticket." He looked over. Lottery, bright colors, absurd promises. "I don't believe in that." She shrugged. "Maybe it don't need you to believe. Maybe it just needs you to be available." He almost said no. then reached into his pocket and added one to the purchase, simply because refusing felt like too much philosophy for a tired evening. She handed him the ticket with theatrical seriousness. "When you win," she said, "remember who encouraged destiny." He put the ticket in his jacket pocket and forgot about it before he reached the parking lot. 3 days later, he was at Marcus's barbershop, helping tighten the hinge on a cabinet door in the back storage area. The television out front was always on. Sports, news, reruns, whatever filled the room without needing commitment. Marcus was mid-conversation with a customer about local elections when the announcer's voice shifted into that overbright, synthetic excitement reserved for jackpot coverage. Nobody paid much attention at first. Then Marcus looked toward the screen, then toward Elijah's jacket hanging on a wall hook, then back to the screen again. "Yo," Marcus said sharply, "what day you buy that ticket?" Elijah, still crouched near the cabinet, frowned. "What ticket?" "The ticket," Marcus pointed. "The one from the store. You said the cashier talked you into it." Elijah laughed from the back room. "Man, I don't even know where that thing is." Marcus came around the corner with a seriousness that cut through the shop noise. "In your jacket." The customer in the chair turned too. "So get it." Elijah stood slowly, more amused than interested. He reached into the pocket and pulled out the folded ticket. Marcus grabbed the remote, raised the volume, and began reading the numbers off the screen. The first matched. So did the second. The third made the room quieter. By the fourth, Marcus was no longer reading like a man entertaining coincidence. By the fifth, Elijah felt his pulse begin to separate from time. By the sixth, the entire world seemed to tilt. "No," he said automatically. Marcus snatched the ticket, checked it again himself, then handed it back with both hands as if it had suddenly become explosive material. "No," Elijah said again, but weaker. The customer was already half out of the chair. Bro! Marcus shouted loud enough to startle the men waiting near the front window. Everybody crowded closer. The announcer on television kept smiling that plastic smile while numbers glowed in a line too impossible to belong to Elijah Carter's life. $100 million. Before taxes, before legal processing, before advisors, banks, headlines, and every practical complication that follows absurd money. But still, $100 million. Elijah sat down so suddenly he almost missed the chair. His hands were shaking now, not wildly, almost delicately, as if his body had decided this level of shock must be approached with care. Marcus crouched in front of him. "Look at me," Elijah did. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" He could not answer. The room had turned into noise and blur around the edges. Somebody was yelling. Somebody was already praising God. Somebody else kept repeating, "Ain't no way. Ain't no way." Elijah looked at the ticket again, then at the screen, then back at the ticket. There are moments when reality refuses entry because the old version of your life is still occupying all the furniture inside your mind. This was one of them. Finally, he whispered a single word. God. Not loud, not performative. The word came out of him like a man dropping to his knees internally. What followed happened quickly, too quickly for emotional processing to keep up. The ticket was verified again, then again. Marcus locked the barbershop door because strangers had started peering in after hearing shouting. Vernon was called, then his mother, then an attorney recommended by a customer whose cousin handled high net worth claims. Within hours, Elijah's life had developed vocabulary he had never expected to need. Claim procedures, discretion, trust structures, tax liabilities, confidential consultation, security concerns. By that evening, the story had not yet reached the news, but it had already reached enough phones to become dangerous. Marcus insisted Elijah not go home alone, so they drove to Gloria's house instead. She opened the door still wearing her church slippers and house dress, expecting some kind of emergency. When Elijah held up the ticket with tears in his eyes, She looked from him to Marcus, then back and whispered, "Don't play with me." "No game, Ma," Marcus said, grinning so wide it almost looked painful. "No game at all." She sat down heavily on the couch. Then she cried, then laughed, then cried again, then took Elijah's face in both hands and said, "Look what mercy can do when life thought it had the final word." That first night, none of them slept much. There was too much to absorb, too much to secure, too much fear attached to something so large. Money at that scale is not just relief, it is disruption. It redraws relationships before you even speak. It attracts hands before it attracts wisdom. By morning, Elijah had already learned his first lesson of sudden wealth. Silence is security. The lawyers moved quickly. A claim was initiated. Identity protections were discussed. Financial advisors arrived with smooth voices and polished teeth. Elijah listened carefully. For once, exhaustion did not own him. Adrenaline had replaced it. But beneath the shock, another feeling had begun to rise. Not triumph, not yet. Distance. A new distance from the old version of life where every bill could bruise and every emergency could destabilize a month. Once the claim was fully confirmed and the first stage of financial planning completed, the leaks became inevitable. A local story broke, then a regional one. Then social media stitched the rest together. A hard-working black man from a modest neighborhood. Years of struggle. Massive jackpot. The kind of story people love because it lets them believe suffering sometimes gets publicly answered. With publicity came the flood. Phone numbers Elijah had not seen in years suddenly lit up his screen. Cousins who had once forgotten birthdays found emotional language. Former classmates remembered that they had always believed he was destined for something big. Women he had not spoken to since his 20s liked photos, replied to stories, and sent messages with words like proud and wow, and we should catch up sometime. Even men who used to dismiss him now called him blessed, with a tone that sounded suspiciously like investment research. He noticed all of it, quietly, carefully. The old Elijah might have felt flattered, or obligated, or guilty for seeing motives too clearly. The new Elijah had been trained by heartbreak to watch energy before words. Then Simone called, not from her blocked number, from a new one. He stared at the phone, let it ring, did not move. A voicemail followed, then another, then a text from an unfamiliar email address asking if they could talk, just for closure. That phrase almost made him laugh. Closure. As if betrayal had left some administrative loose end only conversation could tidy. Marcus was in the room when the second email came. He read the subject line over Elijah's shoulder and shook his head slowly. Hell has excellent timing. Elijah locked the phone and set it face down on the table. Marcus studied him. You okay? Elijah thought about the question before answering. That alone told him how much he had changed. Before, her reaching out would have cracked something open immediately. Now what he felt first was not hope. It was clarity. She heard, he said simply. Marcus snorted. Oh, she heard. People who can smell status always hear fast. Elijah leaned back in the chair. The house was quiet except for rain tapping lightly against the windows. He looked at the ceiling a moment, then said the truth out loud. She still doesn't hurt me because I lost money. She hurts me because she made me feel like what I was giving had no value unless it came wrapped in luxury. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the actual wound. Elijah sat with that, then added, and now she can see value because numbers are doing the talking. No one had to explain the bitterness inside that realization. He had once stood before her carrying sacrifice invisible to the world. Now a jackpot had translated him into a language people respect faster. Still, he refused to let the money become revenge theater. That mattered to him more than anyone expected. He did not want to become one of those men whose first act of wealth is to perform pain in expensive clothes. He had no interest in buying 10 cars to prove he had been underestimated. No interest in posting cryptic captions about loyalty. No interest in letting the woman who had betrayed him become the axis around which his new life rotated. The point was not to show her. The point was to become. So he moved with intention. He paid off his mother's debts quietly. Every single one. Medical balances, mortgage remainder, the credit card she had hidden from him because she did not want to bother the boy. When the bank confirmed the last transaction, Gloria sat at her kitchen table and cried so hard she had to take off her glasses. Not because of the money itself, because for the first time in years, her future did not feel like an apology. Elijah funded the expansion of Marcus's barbershop, despite Marcus protesting loud enough to shake walls. "I am not taking charity," Marcus snapped. "It's not charity," Elijah replied. "It's investment in the only fool who kept me sane." Marcus pointed at him. "You think nice words gonna trick me?" "Yes," Elijah said, "and apparently they're working." By the end of the month, plans were underway to turn the small barbershop into a larger grooming and mentorship space for neighborhood boys. Marcus resisted less after Elijah structured everything properly. That was another change wealth had required. Generosity now needed architecture. Elijah also did something that surprised almost everybody. He started therapy. Not because he was breaking down publicly, because he understood, maybe for the first time, that pain and power make dangerous partners when left unexamined. A sudden fortune could numb old wounds just enough to let them harden inside success. He did not want that. He did not want to become merely richer. He wanted to become healthier. His therapist, Dr. Renee Wallace, was a black woman in her 50s with calm eyes and no patience for performative masculinity. On the second session, after listening to his story without interruption, she asked, "What are you afraid this experience has taught you?" Elijah sat still for a while, then said, "That I'm easiest to love when I'm useful." She watched him quietly. "And do you believe that?" He looked down, a long pause. Then, "Part of me does." She nodded. "That part of you was not created by one woman. She only activated it." That sentence stayed with him for weeks, because it was true. Somewhere beneath Simone's betrayal lived an older habit, a belief that love had to be earned through service, maintained through patience, protected through overgiving. No wonder he had ignored his own depletion. He had mistaken being needed for being secure. In time, the money became less shocking and more logistical. Accounts, structures, decisions, investments, media boundaries. He moved into a secure, temporary residence rather than the oversized mansion some advisors suggested. Luxury held little appeal if it felt like theater. He wanted peace, not spectacle. Yet peace has a strange way of changing posture. By the third month, Elijah looked different, healthier, not because money had magically erased grief, but because pressure had eased enough for his body to remember itself. He slept longer, ate better, got his back treated, bought clothes that fit properly for the first time in years. The mirror no longer reflected a man being used up by tomorrow. Then came the gala invitation. A healthcare equity foundation had learned of his private scholarship donation for black nursing students from low-income backgrounds. The board wanted to honor him. He almost declined, then read the program twice and changed his mind. Because this, unlike spectacle, had purpose. This connected directly to the road he had walked. Not just money for applause. Money turned into access. Simone's name entered his life again 2 days before the event, not through a call, but through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned casually that she would be attending as part of a partner medical institution. Elijah said nothing, only thanked the person for the information and changed the subject. But that night alone, he stood at the window of his temporary home and let the facts settle. The first true collision after the cafe. Not desperation through voicemail, not digital reaching, presence, physical, inevitable. He did not panic. That surprised him. Instead, he felt something steadier, a quiet recognition that the man who would walk into that room was not the same man who had once sat across from her with flowers and a gift box. He had less illusion now, more structure, more peace. And although the old wound still existed, it no longer controlled the whole house of him. The evening of the gala arrived warm and polished. Atlanta shimmered the way cities do when money, ambition, and carefully managed elegance gather under one roof. The ballroom lights were soft gold. Crystal glasses caught chandeliers in fragments. Conversations moved in refined currents. Black excellence, influence, medicine, policy, philanthropy, and polished history all braided through the air. Elijah entered in a dark, tailored tuxedo that fit him like calm. He was not trying to be seen. That was why people saw him. Heads turned quietly when Elijah stepped into the ballroom. Not because he demanded attention, because peace has a presence money cannot imitate. He moved through the room with calm restraint, greeting board members, donors, physicians, and community leaders with the same steady dignity he had once carried into repair jobs and long nights. Only now the world had changed its language around him. The same man who had once been overlooked in work boots was suddenly being introduced with respect, interest, and polished smiles. Elijah noticed it, but he was no longer hungry for what came too easily once numbers were attached to his name. He had just finished a brief conversation with one of the foundation directors when he felt it. That familiar shift in the air, the kind that comes when history enters a room before a face does. He turned. Simone stood across the ballroom in a deep emerald gown, elegant and composed on the surface, but her expression gave her away. Shock first, then longing, then the unmistakable pain of seeing someone you once underestimated become everything you were too blind to recognize in time. For a long moment, neither moved. The music continued softly. Servers crossed the room with trays. Laughter rose from another corner. But between Elijah and Simone, the distance felt still. She looked at him the way people look at consequences when they finally become visible. Elijah did not look away. He also did not rush toward her. That mattered. A year ago, heartbreak would have pulled something from him instantly. Now all he felt was recognition. A chapter, a wound, a lesson. Nothing more powerful than the life he was already living beyond it. Later, during the cocktail hour, she approached him. Elijah. Her voice was softer than he remembered. Not because she had become gentler, because regret had sanded down the arrogance. He nodded once. Simone. She gave a small, nervous smile that died almost immediately. You look, well, he answered simply. I am. That seemed to affect her more than anything else. Not the tuxedo, not the gala, not the wealth everyone in the room now associated with him. The fact that he was well, that he had survived her, that he had not remained broken in the place she left him. Can we talk? She asked. Privately, just for a minute. Elijah studied her face. No performance now, no distance disguised as superiority. Only a woman standing in the full shadow of what she had done. He nodded. They stepped out onto a terrace overlooking the city lights. The air was warm, the skyline glowing in the distance. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Simone exhaled shakily. I've rehearsed this in my head so many times, she said, and none of it sounds right now that you're standing here. Elijah waited. She looked down at her hands. I was wrong, her voice cracked. About you. About what mattered. About what I thought success meant. She swallowed hard. I thought I was choosing a better future. I thought I was outgrowing struggle. But what I was really doing was becoming the kind of person who confuses appearance with value. Elijah said nothing. He had no need to interrupt truth when it was finally speaking clearly. Tears filled her eyes. I hurt you in the ugliest way. You gave me everything, and I made you feel like it meant nothing because it didn't look impressive enough. I have hated myself for that. She laughed bitterly through the tears. And when I heard about the money, I realized how disgusting it must have looked. Like I only understood your worth once the world gave it a number. Elijah looked out over the city for a moment before replying. That's because that is exactly what happened. She closed her eyes. The sentence landed with the weight it deserved. He turned back to her. His voice was calm, not cold, just finished with confusion. When I loved you, Simone, I never felt poor. I felt tired. I felt stretched. I felt scared sometimes. But I never felt poor because I believed I was building something real with you. He paused. The day you left, you did not just break my heart. You insulted my sacrifice. You made everything I gave sound like a burden you had evolved beyond. Tears slipped down her face now. I know. He nodded once. You didn't leave because I had no value. You left because you could not recognize value until it came dressed in visible success. She covered her mouth as she cried. The city lights blurred behind her. For the first time, she looked like someone who fully understood that regret is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the permanent knowledge that you threw away something irreplaceable with your own hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. So sorry. Then, with painful honesty, I don't deserve another chance. I know that. But is there any part of you that could ever forgive me? Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he answered with the kind of truth that only healing can produce. I forgave you enough to stop hating you. A flicker of hope entered her face. Then he finished. But forgiveness is not the same as reopening a door. She broke then. Not theatrically, not manipulatively. Just a woman standing before the wreckage of a choice she could not reverse. Elijah did not comfort her, not because he was cruel, because some grief must be carried by the person who created it. After a while, she nodded slowly. I understand. And for the first time, Elijah believed she actually did. When they walked back inside, the ballroom was being called to order. The foundation chair invited Elijah to the stage for brief remarks. He had not planned a long speech. That was never his style. He stood at the podium, looked out at the room, and spoke with quiet clarity. Too many people stand behind greatness and are forgotten once success arrives, he said. I know what it means to sacrifice in silence. I know what it means to build with no guarantee that your name will be remembered. That is why this work matters to me, because talent should not die in poverty, and loyalty should never be treated like something disposable just because it is quiet. The room applauded. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. Simone remained in the crowd, motionless. That night did not end with revenge. It ended with revelation. Elijah did not need to embarrass her publicly. He did not need to flaunt his wealth in her face. His peace had already done more than anger ever could. In the months that followed, his life grew in the right directions. His foundation expanded, scholarships multiplied. Marcus opened the larger mentorship barbershop they had dreamed up together. His mother moved into a beautiful home with a garden full of roses. And Elijah, for the first time in his adult life, learned to live without confusing love with self-erasure.